We are in the Gemara Masachet Sukka, Daf Nun Amud Bet. Tonight we are in for a rude surprise. And what I mean by rude surprise is some of our learning, I won't say all of it, but of late, some of our learning, both the end of Perek Dalid and maybe even some of the beginning of Perek Hey, was on the lighter side. It was drushas, beautiful and very important fundamental concepts in Judaism, difference between chesed and tzedakah, different drushas of psukim, what's a torshel chesed, torshel initial chesed, right? We talked about some sugya at the end there with the misanenet, and if it spilled, if it was revealed, left uncovered overnight. We spoke last time about the chalil. We started talking about the chalil, the flute, that it's either sounded for 5 or 6 days. It was the major instrument of all of the instruments, either in terms of its sound or some other way that either it started the music off for the Simcha Beit Shoeva, either 5 days or 6 days. We talked about the fact that the Mishnah says that the Chalil that is sounded at the Simcha Beit Shoeva would not be Doches Shabbat or Yom Tov. And when we started and we learned last time, what we started to see, we just got into the beginning of the sugya, and tonight that's why we're in for a rude surprise, because it's gonna get much more labyrinthine and complex. I'm gonna open with like a little bit of a roadmap. So looking at Nun Amud Bet, the first thing the Gemara had was sort of an issue that you could call a lighter type issue with the Simchat Beit Shoeva, Simchat Beit Chashuva. That was the first topic. And then it came to the second topic, which began with the words Tanu Rabbanan at the end of the, 7th or 8th line. There are 2 lines in a row on Nun Amud Bet that start with the word Chashuva. The second one of those, the last word there is Tafresh Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, so I'm going to give you a roadmap. What's going on? First, the part that we learned last time. We started this, right? The Tanu Rabbanan here, the very beginning, is the very fact that there is a machloket in a braita between Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the Chachamim, and the Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the Chachamim have a machloket about whether or not the Chalil is Doche Shabbat. And it doesn't tell us in what context they're having this machloket. Given that the Mishnah was about the Chalil of Simchat Beit Shoeva, you could have made an easy argument. Well, of course, the Chalil refers to Simchat Beit Shoeva. The Mishnah that we have is a Stam Mishnah. There is no dissent in the Mishnah. It's a statement. Everybody agrees, lock, stock, and barrel, right? You can hear the Chalil sounded for the Simchat Beit Shoeva, either 5 or 6 days of Sukkot, but never 7. Why? Because one of those days invariably is going to be Shabbat. Another issue, first day of Yom Tov. Remember? So we said either if the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbat, so then that day there won't be the sounding of the Chalil, and therefore you'll have 6 days. But otherwise, Shabbos Chol Moed, you're going to have an interrupting day, 5 days. Remember, this is what we talked about. Mm-hmm. Now comes a machloket from a braita. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, no, it is permissible, not only on a Yom Tov, but even on a Shabbat. And the Chachamim disagree with him, and they say, no, not only is it not Doche Shabbat, it's not even Doche Yom Tov. Not going to be even Doche Yom Tov. Not going to work. So the Chachamim in this braita. Now, what happens next? What we'll see tonight is the following. Just a roadmap, so we sort of know where we're going, and we'll see how far we actually get on it. First, Rav Yosef will come to tell us in what context this machloket is happening. He'll advance his theory that the machloket is not about Simchat Beit Shoeva. The machloket is much more fundamental, but the Shir on a Korban. Korbanot were associated with the playing of music, and the idea that Tamid Shel Shachar, which means Tamid Shel Shachar and the Korban Musaf, there's music, but not in the Tamid Shel Ben Rabban. So can you play instruments Shabbat and Yom Tov? That's their argument. So Yosef advances his view. That's really what the argument's about. Then come 2 challenges. The challenges run to many lines, right? 2 challenges to Rav Yosef. Knockdown proofs. Number 1, if you don't like the first knockdown proof, here's a second knockdown proof. Now, for another time, we'll have to, if we even get to the 2 proofs, disproofs, I should say, the rebuttals, we'll have to see, well, what is V'ibait Ema? Why do you need a second rebuttal? Why wasn't the first one good enough? And why do you need the first one if you have the second one, etc., right? Why do you need 2? Well, that's that question. We may not get to that question tonight. We'll see. Then, on the heels of that, let's see where I am here so I don't make a mistake. On the heels of that, we have after those 2, we may not get there tonight, a presentation by Rav Papa. Rav Papa thinks that the argument between these two is something else. That's really what they're arguing about is something else. It's not really, and his argument, Rav Papa, is actually the question about whether the ikar of what Rabbi Yosef said, never mind the original Breita. He sort of zoomed in on Rabbi Yosef, and he says, based on your argument, ikar shir b'kli, ikar shir b'peh, how does it really, what's the real machloket there? It's not whether you play it Shabbos or Yom Tov, it's really about who can play these instruments standing on the platform. And finally, sort of zooming out, you could say Rav Yosef at his presentation, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba comes, and he will, let's say for now, resolve things by telling us, it's already on the next page, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba will say, no, I'll tell you what the machloket is between Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda and Rabbanan. He'll have another lens through which to see it. So to review what I just said, we're going to have the Breita, Rav Yosef's understanding of the Breita, a long rejection, relatively speaking, the first rejection will be shorter. The second rejection will be yet more involved. Then within that realm, Rav Papa will try to explicate what the machloket really is on the question that had been raised by Rav Yosef about a machloket about whether ikar shira, the main music that gets played, is the instrumental part or the vocal part. And then finally, Rav Yosef now there's someone else who presents, because Rav Yosef's been laid low in his presentation. We come to the presentation of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, who will say, no, I'll tell you what the machloket really is between Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda and Rabbanan. And let's just say for now, that's where the Gemara is going to leave things. Like, he got it, okay? So first comes Rav Yosef. So first we have to learn what the Breita is, which we saw last time. Tana Rabbanan, Hechalil docher Shabbat, div Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda. V'chachamim omrim af Yom Tov eina docher. All right, that's the Breita. Is the Chalil going to, and it doesn't tell us in what context, but given our Mishnah, you would have thought, well, it's probably about Simchat Beit Shoeva. No, it's not about that, says Rav Yosef. It's something much more fundamental. Amar Rav Yosef, machloka b'shir shel Korban. When the music is being played for the Korban, as the Korban is being offered. Rabbi Yossi savar ikar shira b'kli, va'avodahi, v'docher ha-Shabbat. Since it's part of the avoda, the playing of the instrument, therefore you could play the instrument on Shabbat, because it's part of the avoda. You can do the avoda, so that's part of the mitzvah. Fine. The Rabbanan savri ikar shira b'peh v'lav avodahi ve'ena docher ha-Shabbat. The Rabbanan hold that really when they talk about shira, a song is not instrumental, it's vocal. The musical instrument is just accompaniment. So you can't do it certain days, then we won't do it certain days. It's not really fundamentally part of the avoda. Right? Aval shir shel shoeva, but when it comes to the shir, meaning the music played at the Simcha Beit Shoeva, diver hakol simchi ve'ena doche et Shabbat. When it comes to the Simcha Beit Shoeva, according to this, nobody holds it's a mitzvah. It's not part of the Simcha Beit Shoeva. It's an accompaniment. Simchas Torah, we don't have instruments. Just as an example, most people hopefully don't argue, well, if only we had instruments, it'd be much, much better. Mm-hmm. It's great. It's, so Simcha Beit Shoeva, sometimes you can't have instruments. And everybody agrees to that. And our Mishnah, therefore, is not in contradiction, in any kind of conflict with this Breita, because they're talking about two different contexts. That's Rav Yosef's resolution. Now comes the first rebuttal of Rav Yosef's point. Right? Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay, no worries.
Go ahead, keep going. Maybe just a little bit slower.
Okay. This part was we saw it at the end of last week's Shir, so I thought it was a kind of review.
Yeah, but I have a very, very bad.
Okay. I'll slow it down a little bit. Okay. Before we get to the rebuttals 1 and 2, the Gemara wants to understand, where did Rav Yosef come up with this idea? Where does his claim stem from that he should think that the argument is about something so fundamental, which, by the way, this is not really its sugya. Its headquarters is Masachet Arachin on Daf Yud and Yud Aleph. And there the discussion ensues. So he just said, you remember that? Oh, it's over here. So Amar Rav Yosef. Right? Now Rav Yosef speaks. Minna amina dibahachi pligi. I added in the word of the Bach. That's that little alf. Dibahachi pligi. Rav Yosef says, how do I know that that's the case, that this is really what their argument is about? The Tanya, because we learned that their argument's really about the ikar shira b'peh, right, or ikar shira b'kli, because we learned that generally
Sorry, didn't Rabbi Yosef say that the Magloga was on the Shir Shel Korban? Or no?
How did he? But the Rav Yosef says, now let me explain to you how I came up with this idea.
Okay.
Why I think that this argument to Rav Yosef bar Yehuda and the Chachamim is about what is the Ikar Shira on a Korban.
So Rabbi Yosef's not, he's just bringing the two sides. He's not saying which one I
Right,
believe.
right. He's just telling bringing the big sides. Right. This is what their argument is. Now, why do we care what their argument is? Because how could there be an argument about whether you can blow the Khalil on Shabbat or not? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can. We just learned a Mishnah that said, absolutely you can't.
Right.
So if it says, yeah, but they're talking about apples and oranges. The Mishnah is talking about Simcha Beit Shoeva. The Breita over here is talking about on Shabbos, a regular Shabbos, they have to offer korbanot, so and the singing. So do they play the music or just have singers on Shabbos?
All right, I got the structure now.
Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to show you the structure. So it's kind of like
No.
in a template. So now Rav Yosef says, well, where did I come up with this idea that that's really what the argument's about? How did I figure out that Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda and Rabbanan have a machloket here on this issue, right? His proof is, right, from the question of whether or not you could make clay sharet, the vessels, the appurtenances that were part of the service in the Mishkan and then in the Mikdash subsequently, if you could make them out of wood. When you look in the Torah, it seems patently obvious. The answer is not patently obvious.
Again, please.
Can you make the appurtenances, all the vessels? They have bowls. Can you use a wooden bowl? Does it have to be made out of a metal? You have trumpets. Oh, because maybe there's something fundamental about the fact that in Parshat Truma, God's telling the Jewish people, take gold, take silver, take copper, right? But he also told them.
But is this a cliche?
That's going to be exactly. You just asked $64,000 question. Is the wood? Are the instruments part a clay sharet or not? If they're a clay sharet, it means they're the equipment that we need in order to do the avoda, and therefore the same rules that apply to those vessels and utensils are going to apply to the instruments.
No, they're not.
But maybe these instruments are their accompaniment. They're not really part of the avoda, in which case they could be made out of wood because they're not subject to the same rules and regulations of the other clay sharet.
If you didn't have them, you could still
Yeah,
do the Korban.
exactly. Exactly. Okay, the Torah talks about trumpets, so that for sure not.
Yeah.
That says it has to be made out of silver.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of different instruments, and the Khalil was one of them. I think that's why another reason they use the example of a Khalil, because they said the word chatzotzrot. Then okay, well, the Torah says it has to be made out of silver. The Sfat Emet pointed out handily that before we get into this, just say it now. The Sfat Emet in his commentary on Shas says, wasn't the Aron Kodesh made out of wood? Wasn't the Shulchan made out of wood and then covered with gold? So he says, yeah, but the fact that it was covered with gold means that essentially it's golden. Yeah, as opposed to something that didn't have gold on it at all. It didn't have any metal, just made it of wood. I understand, but the point is, the Rav Yosef says, how do I know that this machloka between Rav Yosef bar Yehuda and the Chachamim is about whether Ikar Shira is Bekli or Bepeh, whether it's the instruments or the voice? I'll tell you how, because there's a machloket that's floating around. Can you make the instruments out of wood? You've seen wood, and everyone knows about wooden instruments. A violin is not made out of metal. And a Khalil is mostly made out of wood, except a flute. A Khalil that we call a Khalil is like a recorder or something, is made out of, a wind instrument is made out of wood. But you could make a flute out of metal. So is it more like does it have to be like metallic, or could you make it out of wood? And Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, remember, he holds that it has, I see you, Larry, give me 1.5 seconds. He holds that you could play these instruments on Shabbos. Rav Yosef says, why? Because it's the mainstay of the avoda of Shira is instruments. Mm-hmm. It's the voices that are accompanying the instruments. The instruments are the main thing. It's an orchestra. It's a symphony orchestra with a little choir in the background. It's not I don't know what, Pavarotti singing and there's some background violin or something or a harp. There's two different things. So Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda says, no, it's a symphony with a little bit of accompaniment on the side of people. And therefore it's part of the avoda. You follow the logic? And if it's part of the avoda, now here's the rub. Is it therefore subject to the same rules of what you have to make those objects out of, as is the case with other things. Do you need a chalil made out of metal? Or Rabbanan would say, well, you can't blow it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You know why? Because they hold it for regular Korban, Pesach, first day Pesach. Nope, cannot blow it. Can't blow it chalil. Shabbos, no, cannot. Why not? Very obviously, because Ikar Shira Bepeh. Some days, since we know the mainstay of the Shira, a Shira means that people are singing. My violin is singing. Is a nice expression, but it's not really singing in that sense. So of course you can make it out of wood because it's not really one of the klei sharet. And because it's not one of the klei sharet, though, it's not an essential part of the avoda, and therefore when it's Shabbos or Yom Tov, you can't play it. Yeah? Larry had a question, comment. Please go ahead.
A question. The chatzotzrot are mentioned explicitly in the Torah. Is the chalil and any other instrument? Isn't that responsive to the question of whether it's a klei sharet?
Okay, yes, potentially, except for the fact that once we consider it part of the avoda, and this is going to be part of the discussion, is it subject to all of the rules and regulations? Does it need a special exception in order to be able to be a klei sharet and yet not be made of metal? We're going to see that ensuing. I'm sort of previewing before actually reading the words. Give a little space for it.
Okay. Was it mutter, or not only mutter, but required to blow the chatzotzrot on Shabbat and Chagim? I would think yes.
But that's not, okay, but here's the difference. That's not part of the Shira al HaKorban. We're talking here about the fact that when the Korbanot are given, they have to have Shira with them.
I understand.
So the Chatzotzrot is separate and distinct. And in fact, when I know what you're saying, but that reality is a reality when we have a Chatzotzrot that have to be blown at certain times. Remember, the Torah describes Pashat Balotcha, certain times when we sound the Chatzotzrot. Right? But this is apples and oranges, right? Because even though they're both instruments, the point is these instruments are actually part of the avoda of korbanot.
Which the chatzotzrot were not.
Right, exactly. The chatzotzrot were not. That's the idea. The chatzotzrot are not part of the avoda of the korban itself. They have their own part of the avoda, but they're not part of the korban avoda.
Where did the practice of the chalil and whatever instruments there may have been, how did that come about?
You're asking me a great question. It's a little bit of a loaded question. When we look at the Gemara in Arachin on Daf Yud, Yud Amud Aleph, Yud Amud Bet, Yud Aleph, so that's where it starts describing the idea that there are different instruments that are being used different times, and the fact that when you offer korbanot, you need shir at the same time. In fact, the Gemara in Arachin, the Mishnah there, starts off talking about chatzotzrot and shofarot, and in that sugya, it's talking about, okay, so then what's going on that's different, where we have the chalil that's being used, yeah, and why, and under what circumstance? That has to do with hallel and singing, and so the Gemara starts getting into the question of, okay, there's a shir on the korban. You require shir on a korban. Very good. So is that really about the singing, or is that really about the playing?
Or is it Eli Van Vehu or Hidur Mitzvah?
You're back in the world of Hallel, and you're back, right? But that's all true for Hallel and Hallel sugyas, etc. Right. But now we're talking about something else, which is that there was the playing of music. We saw this in the Mishnah, in Rashi rather, on last week, really. It was the second Rashi, Shir Shel Korban. And it described at the time of the Nisuch Hayayin was specifically when they would do it. By the way, I made a mistake. I want to correct it. I forgot myself. Apparently, Nisuch Hayayin of the Talmud Shel Ben Harbaim, they also had to do the Shir. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I withdraw. I thought it was only in Talmud Shel Shachar. It's both. Okay. They played the music. That's what they were doing. And the point is that it's connected to the avoda itself. Rabbi Yossi says, how do I know, Rabbi Yosef rather now says in the Gemara, how do I know that the machloket is really on the issue of Shir, Shel, Korban generally? So I'm on those words, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Mina Amina, Debahachi, Plige, the Tanya, because it says, Klei Sharet Sha'asan Shel Eitz, Rabbi Posel, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Machshir. So when you have a Klei Sharet, a bowl, a spoon, a shovel, call it whatever you will, a tongs made out of wood, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda thinks it's kosher, and Rabbi says it's not kosher. So my love baha kamiflige. This must be what they're arguing about in our Breita that we started with tonight, of whether you could blow, whether Chalil is docha Shabbat or not. Mandamachshir savar ikashira bakli. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, who says that it's kosher to use a wooden Chalil. We imagine a Chalil is normally made of wood, as Ira pointed out. Again, but it could be made like a flute out of metal. But the assumption here is, okay, Kli Shar, Ikashir Bakli. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is consistent. He holds it is permissible to use a wooden Chalil, and therefore it's permissible to use it on Shabbos because it's not really part of the Avoda, right? V'alfina, and it's learned, Mi Abuva de Moshe. There was apparently and the Gemara describes this in Masachet Arachin, there was a wooden flute. It was made out of reeds, right? A reed flute, as flutes, a recorder rather. That was from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and it was being used purportedly and the Shir Shel Korban. It's wood. And therefore therefore they're not part of the Klei Sharet. That's the assumption right now. So Uman de Pasil, meaning the other opinion, Rebbe, who says pasul to use a Klei Sharet made of eights, Savar Ikashir Bepeh. He holds, well, the mainstay of the Shira is with one's mouth. Therefore, when you tell me that there was a recorder made out of wood from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, of course there was, because that it was not the main element of the song. The song was the people singing, not the playing of an instrument which accompanied it. And therefore, yes, it could be even out of wood. So that's Rav Yosef's presentation. That's, so to speak, his proof that when he saw this machloket that we saw, again, that we opened with tonight, Hechalil docher Shabbat, Divrei Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, V'chalim omrim af Yom Tov eno docher, right? That machloket and the Breita lines, whatever it was, 8 and 9 and 10 in the Gemara here today, right? Rabbi Yosef says, I'm telling you, they're arguing about regular Shabbos and Yom Tov, and they're arguing about the question of a Shir Shel Korban. Okay?
And if the pet is the Iker, then it would not go for Shabbos.
Then it would not be Docha Shabbos.
Right. And if it's, but then on the other
And
hand,
then,
if
because
it's
then
not
you just
the-
don't play it
wait,
on
wait, if
Shabbos.
it's not the Iker, then it could be made out of anything.
Exactly.
If it is the Iker, it needs to be made out of metal,
Exactly.
and it then would go for Shabbos.
Mhm.
So that's how we get there.
Mhm.
Okay, I got it.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. But except, sorry, I want to modify one thing that you said, Mark, just to clarify it.
Yeah.
Is that the opinion that holds that you could play it on Shabbos also holds that the Iker of the Shira is in the Kli.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. It would
Okay,
have
but
to-
just making sure.
right,
Therefore,
Right, it would have to be for all that.
An argument if he would too, even though it's thicker, or it has to be metal, then it's gonna be.
it sounds like if it's Iker, then it's, yeah. Because it right. Once it's a cliche, right? So since Iker Shira, and once you say Iker Shira B'Peh, like Rabbi does, so then you don't learn from the Abuva de Moshe, right? And there's no we don't learn from there that there's any heter to make clay sharet out of wood generally, right? Because according to the Rebbe, clay sharet of 8 is puzzle. But there was something that you played in the Beis Hamikdash that was not made out of metal. It was, but that's not part of the clay sharet. Because the Iker Shira is really Bepeh and not the accompaniment.
So with that, if it's made out of wood and it's not part, it's cliche, it's not considered cliche.
If it's made out of wood, it's not right. It's
So
not gonna be,
that's more of a abundant thing, or it still could be deoraita.
no, it's there is a doraita obligation. Either it's a chi of doraita or it's not a chi of doraita. We're going to start cutting and pasting the psukim shortly, but that's part of the question. Is it a requirement to Oraita or is it not a requirement to Oraita? But it's not a Takana de Rabbanan or something. No, it's de Oraita or it's not de Oraita. It's a question of whether the variation is there or not. And again, and according to Rebbe, in this, what Rav Yosef's proof text is, he says it's possible to make a kli sharei out of wood, and that's why he holds Iker Shir B'Peh. So even if there was a Chalil made of wood, who cares? Because it's not one of the kli sharei. And you know what? You can't play it on Shabbos. You know why? Because it's not really vital to the Shir Shel Korban, because the Shir Shel Korban is about people singing. Another question.
I don't understand why it is or is not a proof that it was or was not made out of wood or metal, since the Torah does not give a description of what the Chalil is to be made of.
It doesn't even mention the word Chalil.
I know that. It's not in the Torah.
Okay, but then so let me say it like this. There's a Masorah that in the Beit HaMikdash, for many, many years, they had a Chalil. They called it the Abuva de Moshe. And
Which was
Abuv is another word for Chalil, apparently. So they had the Abuva of Moshe was the Chalil of Moshe. Was it literally made by him or not? I don't know. The point was it's from his time. And when they had this, they would play it. Okay, so when they played it, is that because it was just an accompaniment to people singing, but it wasn't really part of the avoda? Or were they playing it because it's a message that really you could make klei sharei out of wood?
And which therefore would negate the argument that since it was made out of wood, it was not a klei sharei, because supposedly it would have to be made out of metal. But here's a case with the Abuah de Moshe, which was made out of reeds.
Right. But the one piece that you might be, maybe I just didn't hear it correctly, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds that it's permissible to play it because he holds that the Iker Shira is actually with a Kli. And since he holds the Iker Shira as a Kli, therefore, he thinks that the fact that we have such a recorder is to teach us that the klei sharei could actually be made out of wood, which Rebbe disagrees with. He says, no, that's not true.
Okay, but that
but Rebbe, excuse me, there's a wooden instrument in the Beit HaMikdash. Yes, says Rebbe, but I don't think the instruments were so important. I think they're not actually even part of the avoda. They're an accompaniment to help people sing along nicely. But really, the singing is the main thing. Therefore, on Shabbos, I don't let people play the instruments.
I'm not arguing any clarification. Then what happens to the argument that if it's made out of metal, then it's a klei sharei, and if it's not made out of metal, then it's not a klei sharei, with the exception of Abuah de Moshe?
I think you're just saying the equation here does go both ways, but let me say what you're saying, but backwards. It's a little bit like Art and I were having a conversation about history, like determining things in halacha and whether that would be relevant or not, and what circumstances we're talking about this one day out of the Shir. The fact in the Mishkan, in the Beit HaMikdash, they have a wooden recorder which they claim is from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. So, what does that teach us? One of two things: either A, we're allowed to have wooden utensils in the Beit HaMikdash. How do we know? Came from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and see, we play the instruments all the time, and there's a wooden one, so clearly you can use wooden ones. Or yes, there is a wooden instrument, but you know what? The instruments are not really part of the rest of the equipment in the Beit HaMikdash. They're quite literally a sideshow. They happen to be there. So you want to bring a proof that there's a wooden instrument, but we don't care about the instruments, because instruments is not a category we really care about. We care about the vocals. Therefore, the Shir Shira B'Peh, so therefore the instruments, you're not proving anything to me, the fact that it's made out of wood. Because you're right, I think that we were not allowed to make them out of wood, but it's not one of them. Didn't make the grade. And Rav Yosef was just saying, based on this machloket between, and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, the point is he's the link. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is in both stories. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda in Exhibit A says, according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is saying, I hold that you could blow the Chalil on Shabbat, right? I hold you could blow the Chalil on Shabbat, it's kosher. You know why? Because I think Iker Shira B'Kli, and I think we learn this from the fact that there was a wooden recorder but it was that's exactly the limud. We learned Rav Moshe Rabbeinu was made of the Chalil, but Rabbi says I know Rabbi is not in both of these braitot. The first one Rabbi's not in, just as Chachamim. Chachamim say you're not allowed to blow the Chalil on Shabbat. Period. Right? So why do they hold that? Because they hold the Iker Shir B'Peh, and therefore the fact that there is a wooden instrument, the Kli Shar would have to be out of metal, but doesn't matter. You know why? Because they're not. It's not part of the set of Kli Shar anyway. Yeah, we're not learning anything from the fact that there is a wooden Chalil. It doesn't teach us anything because Chalils are not really part of the Kli Sharet. They're just kind of there as the background. Larry, I feel like you're not satisfied. I see you still shaking your head.
No, it's okay. Please, let's go on. Please.
I could be. I'm confounding everybody. I don't mean to. Are you with the program here? Or are you?
I think I am.
Okay.
I don't know that I'll remember it in 2 weeks, but I'm here right now.
Okay. Larry, with respect, I'm getting the word from you, and then I'm getting some confirmation over here. Like I got to move on.
Please move on.
Okay. Okay. So now, I would say there are going to be now 2 rebuttals of Rav Yosef. The only real difference, the jumping off point between the 2 rebuttals, you could picture it like we just said as a machloket, Iker Shira B'Kli, Iker Shira B'Peh, excuse me, say it backwards. Iker Shira B'Kli, Iker Shira B'Peh, it goes this way, it goes that way, okay? And that's the point of machloket between Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says Iker Shira B'Kli, and Rabbanan say Iker Shira B'Peh. It's a machloket. And Rabbi Yosef says that's the whole argument between the 2 of them, right? Okay? And depending how you hold, you're going to decide whether generally on Shabbos and Yom Tov, when you're blowing it, can you blow the Chalil while the Korban while the Nisuch HaYayin is taking place during the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, and I stand corrected, Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim as well. So 2 the rebuttals. Rebuttal number 1 says, you know what? Let's change this scenario, because the truth is everyone agrees, says rebuttal number 1, that Iker Shira is B'Kli. The main function of the song is the instrumental component. Dechia number 2, which we probably at this rate will not get to tonight.
Everyone agrees to that.
This is the rebuttal. Is no, Rav Yosef, you're wrong. Really, everyone holds that everyone in this discussion holds Iker Shira B'Kli, and then we're going to have a rebuttal. Then after the rebuttal's over, to say, and if you want, you could say that another rebuttal of Yosef is no. Everybody holds Iker Shira B'Peh. Okay, and it's going to have a second rebuttal. So you'll say to me, Rabbi, is Iker Shira B'Peh, Iker Shira B'Kli? And I'm going to answer you. I'm not answering the question. It's a Shas Machloket. When you go to the Gemara in Erchin, there's a back and forth, right? And it's immaterial. The point was, Rav Yosef was trying to explain how could there be a Braita that seems to contradict a Stam Mishnah. The Mishnah said, here's what we do with the Chalil. The Chalil only 5 days or 6 days. It can't be blown on Shabbos, not in the first day Yom Tov. So he said, excuse me, what about the Gemara saying, well, what about this other Braita? Says, no, that Braita wasn't about this discussion. The Braita there is about the famous machloket, Iker Shira B'Kli, Iker Shira B'Peh. And let me show you how that's true and how the positions line up. So the first rebuttal says, no, it actually opens with that negation. All right. So I'm the first 2 words, I'm halfway down the page, Abuva de Moshe from the last Gemara. And now, lo, de Kule Alma Iker Shira B'Kli. Here's rebuttal number 1. No, says the Gemara to Rav Yosef and his whole interpretation of this Braita. No, everybody holds the Iker Shira is B'Kli. Okay? But rather, what is this argument about between Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda and and Rabbi, right? Abuva is a Chalil.
So it's another word for
There's another word for Chalil. Yeah, I wouldn't go through all the Rashis, but you'll take my word for it at the moment. It's another word essentially.
It's a Hebrew word, abuv.
Oh.
We use it today. It's a wooden. It's much wider than a regular chalil, but they play it in a symphony, oboe.
Oh, it's an oboe?
Yeah, abuv בעברית. אותו דבר.
Abuv, oboe, abuv. Okay, thank you. Who knew? Okay, so in this dechia, the way the rebuttal works, the rebuttals don't attack the initial assertion of Rav Yosef. They attack his proof.
Right.
Okay. And oh, were you going to say
Keep
something?
going, keep going.
So therefore, what is going to be attacked now, what's going to be assailed, is going to be the machloket, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda and Rabbi, about the story about this wooden oboe, the abuv of Moshe Rabbeinu.
So,
And who cares?
Wait, Mark first and then George. Mark.
right, right.
Who cares?
Right.
Well, let me rephrase
We'll get to the who cares question in a minute. Yeah. Mark first. Go. Yeah.
Right, I was gonna come back and say, when you forecast ahead, the real essence here is that the machlokas on the Shir Shel Korban. There's a proof that says here's why it's that, and that's
what's being attacked.
Do we come back later and say, here's another proof as why it could be Shir Shel Korban?
Nope.
No.
Because
Okay,
what's
so
going to happen is
there's
he
no-
lost
there's no
once
other
he
way-
lost his proof, then it's just like an empty
Okay,
assertion.
but there's no other way to interpret the machloket as being on Shir Shel Korban except using the kli. and the-
Except using this proof.
Okay. got it.
And by the way, I don't know if everyone heard what Mark said. If the proof is rebutted,
It's a
so
nicer way to say it.
does the assertion still stand? The answer is no. And particularly here, I want you to realize what's going on in the Gemara is that Rav Yosef explained to us why the Breita is apples and oranges to what's going on in the Mishnah. Mishnah is about Simchat Shoeva. Gemara, the Breita is about Shir Shel Korban. But Rav Yosef himself said, and let me explain to you why I believe this to be the case. Because the same Rav Yosef Bar Yehuda, who has a machloket in a Breita against the Rabbanan about whether you can blow a Chalil on Shabbat,
Also-
which I say is Shir Shel Korban, happens to be the star person in the discussion with him and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, with Rabbi, about whether or not you can use a wooden a kli sharet or not. And Rabbi says, no way. And Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, yes, you can. And we understand Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, yes, you can
Because
use a
you-
wooden one because he holds Iker Shira B'peh, right? Iker Shira B'kli, I meant to say, and therefore it's part of the avoda, and therefore it's docha Shabbos. That's it, right? Okay, so here we have the kule alma Iker Shira B'peh, the kule alma Iker Shira B'kli, excuse me. They're arguing about a principle called Danin Efshar Mishi Efshar. We're learning the possible from the impossible. Okay? It's not really impossible. It's that which is not acceptable, really, which can't be done. So we'll, now the Gemara will explain what it means by this principle. So as follows. Manda Machshir, it's actually lined up beautifully on two different lines. Manda Machshir Savar, and then underneath it says Manda Pasal Savar. So Manda Machshir Savar, the one who holds that it's kosher, right? The one who is Machshir, right? Who says that it's okay to use a kli sharet as an eitz, a kli sharet made of eitz as part of the avoda. How do I know? Because Yosef Yehuda holds that way, and he holds Iker Shira B'kli, and you could do it on Shabbos. Okay. Savar Danin Efshar Mishii Efshar. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda holds Danin Efshar Mishii Efshar. Therefore, a kli made of eitz, like the abuv of Moshe, that could not have been made any other way. It could not have been made of metal. You know why? Because it changed the sound. It wouldn't work. It would be destroyed. It wouldn't sound good. So therefore, we will learn Danin Efshar Mishii Efshar. We'll learn from from the impossible rather to the possible, right? Danin Efshar Mishii Efshar. Since it's impossible to make a chalil, I don't mean a chatzotzrot, I don't mean a flute, I mean an oboe, I mean a recorder. Since it's impossible to make that really out of metal and get the same sound, therefore it has to be made out of wood. Ergo, I can also learn that other things, even though ideally maybe they should be made out of metal, you could also make them out of wood. From the exception comes the rule. Danin Efshar could be done out of metal, Mishii Efshar, something that is impossible to be made out of metal. Since the abuv de Moshe, the whole thing about it was that it was made out of a nice sounding reed, and you can't make it out of anything else. In fact, Rashi here quotes from the Gemara in Erchin that once upon a time, one of the kings said, we should really cover that beautiful abuv de Moshe in gold. And they did, and it sounded terrible. The sound wasn't good. So what do? They removed the covering, and it sounded nice again. They realized it has to be wood. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, aha, That's what I wanted to tell you. Done in Efshar, Misha'i Efshar. Since it's impossible to have an abuv de Moshe, the recorder, sound nice unless it's made out of wood, that tells me that other things could also be made out of wood. And therefore, any kli sharet could be made out of wood. And therefore, the chalil is a kli sharet. And therefore, the chalil, which is ikar shir b'kli, could be done on Shabbos. Yeah? Okay. Rebbe disagreed. Uman de pasul savar, lo done in Efshar Misha'i Efshar. You cannot learn that. You're not going to, but rather the abuv of Moshe is an exception. There was no other way. When it came to the abuv of Moshe, yes, that had to be made out of wood because you're stuck. But that's not teaching us a law, a halacha about the menorah. No, the menorah, it says, has to be made out of gold. It's made out of gold. Other things could have been chosen also, made out of acacia wood, even, but covered in gold. Of course. Why is the recorder that way? But the lays brayer. What do you want from my life? That's what Rebbe's basically saying. What do you want from my life? Ain't done in Efshar B'Sh'i Efshar. That was the who cares. That's George's who cares. B'Shem. That's B'Shem. B'Shem. So that's what he's saying. It says, what did you want from me? You want to extrapolate from the abuv de Moshe? He says, Ein danin, lo danin, Efshar B'Sh'i Efshar. You don't learn. Sorry, it was Ein danin. Look at the Haggadah Bach. Ein danin Efshar B'Sh'i Efshar. We don't learn the possible from the case where there was no other choice. To say now is one full equation, one full sentence. Rabbi says to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, excuse me, the fact that the abuv de Moshe was made out of wood teaches us nothing about the rest of the klei sharet. The fact that it was made out of wood is because there was no other choice. By the way, ikar shira b'peh, and I don't think that it really, the instruments, what they're made of matters one way or the other, because it's not really part of the avoda. It's the accompaniment to the voices. The voices are what are primary in the song. And therefore, I don't think you can blow these instruments on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's not going to be Dochel Shabbos and Yom Tov because it's not really one of the Kli Sharet. And don't try to tell me you're going to say done in Efshar Misha'i Efshar. I reject that whole principle. I don't accept. Rebuttal number one. I'm already out of time, so I guess we're not getting to rebuttal number two. It's like the worst possible place to end because rebuttal number two is way longer. Number one, no, where is it? Rebuttal number two is way longer. Suffice it to say, it has a carryover to Masechet Nazir. Talking to my father this morning, I was learning the daf, and he mentioned to me that they're a few days ahead, I think, in Montreal, that they recently did a whole thing about Klalu Frat and Ribuy and Mute. Is that now?
Yeah, today.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, so he told me that this morning that they just did it today. They did it last night. Was it their day ahead? So he said, "Oh, it's like really complicated." So I said, "Oh, interesting." You know, I was thinking like, and tonight's Shir is going to involve Klalu Frat and Ribuy and Mute. And I don't think we're going to end up getting there because it's going to turn everybody's head. But the second Dechia, we'll have to find some other time for Shir. The second Dechia opens with, look, the Kule Alma Ikar Shir B'Peh, right? That's not the Shir, it's a song. But, and that's going to be the back and forth. We're again going to have a machloket between Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda. Yeah. But what we saw in Dechia number one should be enough to tide us over for now is if we were to maintain that everyone holds Ikar Shir B'Kli, then you can't really start drawing lines between the machlok between Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda and Rebbe with regard to the abuv de Moshe and the kli sharet made of eights, and retroject it back on whether you can blow to chalul or not to some other argument. How do you know it's talking about the same thing? It's not clear at all because Rav Yosef's whole point was according to Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, the Ikar Shir is B'Kli, but the Chachamim say Ikar Shir B'Peh. But let's say everybody holds Ikar Shir B'Kli. Then we're back to square one. It's not going to work. So that was rebuttal number one. We'll have to leave it rebuttal number two on page Nun Amud Bet. Where are we? At the Ema, the Ibait Ema the Kulam Ikar Shir B'Peh for another time. We don't have any other choice right now. Okay. La'al Tov, everybody, and we will resume the Shir soon. But not next Monday night because we all have other plans. Ad kan.